Imagine a royal name so sacred, no one dared touch it until now. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have stunned the world by requesting to change their surname to Spencer, the name of Harry's late mother, Princess Diana. But this isn't just a simple name change. It's a challenge to centuries of tradition and a move that has rocked the very foundations of British aristocracy. Tonight, we reveal Earl Spencer's rare and powerful response, the first time he's broken his silence. What does this mean for the monarchy? And why is this more than just a family feud? Stay with us as we uncover the secrets, the stakes, and the drama behind a name that has never before been questioned until now. Have you ever heard a story so startling, so audacious, that it makes you question everything you thought you knew about royalty, family, and legacy? This is one of those stories. It begins not in Buckingham Palace, not in Windsor Castle, but with a single whisper. A whisper that soon thundered through aristocratic corridors and royal tabloids alike. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, have made a request that many consider both radical and reckless. They want to officially change their last name to Spencer. Yes, Spencer, the maternal surname of Princess Diana, Harry's beloved mother. But this isn't just a paperwork shuffle or a branding strategy. This is a seismic move with the power to unravel centuries of royal tradition, sever bloodlines, and ignite emotional battles on both sides of the Atlantic. For some, it may sound like a harmless change, even a romantic gesture honoring a lost mother. But for Earl Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, and the current custodian of the Spencer legacy, this was not just a matter of names or titles. It was a breach of sacred lineage. When the news broke that Harry and Meghan were seeking to rename themselves and their children as the Spencers, it was not met with quiet diplomacy. It was met with resistance, stern, unapologetic, and very public. In an era when royal drama often unfolds behind the polished facades of palaces and on the front pages of tabloids, Earl Spencer did something rare. He spoke. Never in our genealogy. Those were his exact words. A denial. A wall erected against his own nephew. And with that single sentence, he made it clear that whatever Harry and Meghan's grievances with the Windsor clan might be, they would not find unconditional refuge under the Spencer name. What followed was a media firestorm. A battle of ideologies, and a question that cut straight to the heart of royal identity. Can one simply walk away from a royal surname and adopt another as if rewriting history? And who has the right to decide? But to fully understand the magnitude of this moment, we must take a few steps back. We must look at how we got here. How Prince, born third in line to the British throne, ended up trying to break ties not only with his royal family, but now seemingly with the very institution of royalty itself. We must explore why Meghan Markle, a woman once hailed as a modernizing force within the monarchy, has found herself once again at the center of a cultural and familial rupture. And we must understand why Earl Spencer, who has largely stayed away from the spotlight since his sister's tragic death, felt compelled to break his silence with such force. This isn't just a story about names. It's a story about power, bloodlines, betrayal, memory, and legacy. It's about the push and pull between public image and private conviction. It's about a mother's influence that transcends death, and the battles her children continue to fight in her name, sometimes even against each other. It's about the invisible weight carried by surnames in aristocratic society, and the very visible consequences of trying to shed or reshape that weight. From the outside, the Spencers have always seemed like reluctant participants in the pageantry of British royalty. They're old money, older even than the Windsors in many ways, but they've maintained a distance from the crown. Diana was their shining exception, a daughter married into the House of Windsor who would go on to become the people's princess, beloved by millions but ultimately consumed by the very institution she married into. After her death, Charles Spencer became the keeper of her memory, delivering a thunderous eulogy at her funeral that criticized the monarchy's treatment of her and vowed to protect her sons. That promise, made with trembling hands before a grieving world, is now being tested in ways no one could have imagined. What Harry and Meghan have proposed is nothing less than a reinvention. By taking the Spencer name, they seem to be making a definitive statement. We are no longer Windsors. We are not tethered to the monarchy. We are the descendants of Diana, not Charles. This, in many ways, is the culmination of a long unraveling. A final chapter in Harry's departure from the firm, his step away from the traditions that shaped his youth, his rejection of the institution he once represented with solemn pride. And yet, Earl Spencer's rejection of that name change tells a different story. It signals that even Diana's family, those who mourned her most, are not fully aligned with Harry and Meghan's crusade. The Spencers, for all their historical complexity, have a code. To them, genealogy is not a tool of reinvention, but a ledger of blood and tradition. It is not a brand, it is a legacy. And allowing someone, even a blood relative, to adopt that name outside its established rules and lineage may seem, to them, like a desecration of heritage rather than an act of homage. Of course, names carry weight in the royal ecosystem. They are more than labels. They are loaded with history, duty, scandal, and identity. Mountbatten-Windsor, the current family name used by some descendants of Queen Elizabeth II, reflects a compromise between the royal house of Windsor and Prince Philip's family name, Mountbatten. Harry and Meghan originally retained that designation even after stepping back from royal duties. But now, to abandon even that hybrid title for Spencer is to announce a clean break, one that doesn't just draw a line in the sand, but tries to walk away from the beach altogether. The implications are vast. If the Sussex children adopt the Spencer name, it could create a split in identity from their royal cousins. It raises legal questions about titles, inheritance, and public representation. It complicates the already thorny debate over whether Harry and Meghan are using their royal connections for gain while simultaneously rejecting the responsibilities those connections entail. And for Earl Spencer, it poses a risk of dilution, of turning the Spencer legacy into a political tool in a much broader war between the Sussexes and the British establishment. This may explain why Charles Spencer, typically silent and dignified in his public life, chose this moment to make a rare and definitive statement. Never in our genealogy. It is a line drawn in indelible ink. It separates the romanticized memory of Diana from the strategic maneuvering of her son and daughter-in-law. It distinguishes mourning from marketing, legacy from leverage. The British public is divided. Some see Harry and Meghan's attempt to adopt the Spencer name as a powerful reclaiming of Diana's narrative, a way of honoring the woman who was so often betrayed by the monarchy. Others view it as yet another attempt to manipulate public sympathy and rewrite history in a way that serves their brand. And caught in the crossfire are two innocent children, Archie and Lilibet, who may one day carry a surname that has become more than just a name. It has become a battleground. So as we begin this journey through the labyrinth of royal identity, estranged family ties, and ancestral ownership, ask yourself this. What does it truly mean to carry a name? Is it a right, a responsibility, or merely a relic of the past? And in a world where the lines between royalty and celebrity grow ever thinner, who gets to decide how a legacy is lived or rewritten? Stay with us, because this story is only just beginning. It began in whispers, as so many of the world's most disruptive royal acts often do. A quiet conversation behind the walls of a Montecito estate. A suggestion over coffee, perhaps. A line scrawled in a personal journal or discussed over late-night reflection. But soon, that whisper evolved into a concrete legal request, one that would land with a thud in both legal offices and aristocratic circles on two continents. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, had formally initiated proceedings to change their family's last name, not just in everyday use, but in official documentation for themselves and their children. Their chosen name, Spencer. The world reacted swiftly. Analysts dissected every syllable of the news. Historians scrambled to contextualize. Was this a snub to the House of Windsor? A calculated embrace of Diana's legacy? Or something else entirely, perhaps a symbolic rejection of monarchy in favor of lineage that was emotionally, not institutionally, driven? No matter the interpretation, the implications were undeniable. With a single name, Harry and Meghan had reopened every wound, every unresolved trauma, every generational scar tied to the tragic life and death of Diana, Princess of Wales. The timing was no accident. Though the Sussexes had long wrestled with their identity post-Megxit, insiders close to their camp suggest that the idea of a name change had been simmering for years. It wasn't until their two children, Archie and Lilibet, began to reach developmental milestones that the question grew urgent. What name would appear on their school documents? What name would they answer to in public settings? And most importantly, what name would carry them into adulthood in a world still obsessed with the drama of their heritage? Harry, now distanced physically and ideologically from the British monarchy, began to reflect deeply on the burden of the Windsor name. In his mind, it was not just a relic of his past, it was the very institution that contributed to the destruction of his mother, that commodified her life and offered little in return. In one reported private conversation, Harry is said to have remarked, "I don't want my children's legacy defined by the people who failed my mother. I want them to carry the name of the one person who protected me, loved me, and stood for everything this family isn't." For Meghan, the name change was a statement of autonomy. Her critics often accused her of exploiting the royal connection while simultaneously decrying its treatment of her. This, she believed, would be the answer. By shedding the Windsor name, she could disentangle her family's future from the royal institution entirely, proving once and for all that they had no intention of continuing to ride its coattails. It was, in her view, a reset button, a way to start anew with a name she could embrace without the entanglements of the monarchy's historical baggage. But such a decision was not so easily executed. The House of Windsor, though stripped of much political power, still wields enormous symbolic influence. And legally, changing the name of individuals born into royalty, especially minors with birth certificates already bearing titles and formal designations, was not a simple matter of paperwork. It required consultations with attorneys in the UK and the United States. It required navigating noble registers, peerage rules, and diplomatic sensitivities. Moreover, the selection of Spencer was not without consequences. The Spencer family is not just any family. It is one of England's oldest and most prestigious aristocratic bloodlines, with roots stretching back to the 15th century. Its legacy is steeped in honor, tradition, and cautious detachment from the royal family, especially after Diana's turbulent life and tragic death. By aligning themselves with the Spencers, Harry and Meghan weren't just renaming themselves. They were attempting to insert themselves into a lineage guarded fiercely by its living descendants, most notably Diana's brother, Charles Spencer, the ninth Earl Spencer. The Earl had always maintained a quiet dignity in the years following his sister's death. Occasionally emerging to defend her memory, he otherwise receded from the limelight, content to manage the family estate at Althorpe and honor Diana through quieter means. But when news of Harry and Meghan's intention reached his ears, it stirred something in him. What followed would shock even those who believed they had seen every twist in the Sussex saga. Sources close to Earl Spencer revealed that he was not consulted before the couple pursued the name change. He found out the same way the public did, through a leak to the press, followed by a wave of inquiries directed at his family. For a man who had once publicly promised to protect Diana's sons from the very institutions that harmed her, this was a deeply personal affront. In private, he was said to be livid. In public, he was resolute. In an uncharacteristically direct statement, the Earl remarked that the name Spencer belonged to a line defined by strict genealogical continuity, not emotional symbolism. The Spencer name, he said, is not a canvas for reinvention. It is a thread of history that must be protected from politicization, from branding, from the emotional reinterpretations of others, no matter how well-intentioned. His message was clear. Blood alone did not entitle Harry to claim the Spencer legacy as his own, especially not in a manner that might redefine it for future generations. The backlash was immediate. Public opinion split down familiar fault lines. Supporters of Harry and Meghan heralded the move as courageous and authentic, a bold stand against the institution that they say traumatized them. Others viewed it as opportunistic, a symbolic manipulation of Diana's legacy for personal narrative control. And critics of the Sussexes accused them of once again using family, living and dead, as pawns in their ongoing battle with the monarchy. Yet for all the drama swirling around the decision, there remained one persistent question. What did Diana herself want? Of course, no one could answer that definitively. But clues existed. Letters she had written to friends, conversations remembered by confidants, and, most notably, her funeral, where her brother Charles had sworn to protect her memory from the very monarchy that failed her. It is widely known that Diana maintained deep loyalty to her Spencer roots. Even after her divorce from Prince Charles, she found solace in Althorpe. She often spoke of escaping royal life entirely. But whether she would have endorsed her son abandoning his Windsor name in favor of Spencer is a question that remains unanswerable, and perhaps intentionally so. Diana was many things to many people. Her memory has become both a sanctuary and a weapon, depending on who wields it. The children, too, complicate matters. Archie and Lilibet are still too young to understand the political and emotional significance of their names. But someday they will. And what will they make of it? That they were once part of the House of Windsor and then reborn as Spencers? That their names carry with them the weight of generational conflict, of royal trauma, of media battles fought long before they could even speak? More practically, there were legal hurdles to overcome. For a name change of this magnitude to be formalized across both nations, multiple bureaucratic and diplomatic channels had to be navigated. While the United States permits surname changes through family courts, the United Kingdom, especially when royalty is involved, has more complex requirements. Birth certificates, passports, public registries, and even property documents would need to be amended. Titles would be called into question. Would Spencer replace Sussex on official documentation? Could a member of the British peerage simply abandon his royal surname and still retain his status? These were questions that hadn't been asked before, let alone answered. The reaction from Buckingham Palace was expectedly muted but unmistakably cold. An unnamed senior aide was quoted as saying, "We will not be drawn into private family matters." But behind the scenes, there was concern. The move could set a dangerous precedent. If Harry and Meghan could opt out of their royal name and assume another, what did that mean for the integrity of the monarchy's lineage? Could other royals follow suit? Could a peerage title be decoupled from its associated surname without undermining the very structure of the system? Meanwhile, the British press had a field day. Headlines ran from sympathetic to savage. Sussex's Seek Spencer sanctuary, one tabloid declared, while another sneered, Harry dumps royal past for Diana's ghost. For days, the name change eclipsed every other royal story. Even Prince William, usually insulated from his brother's escapades, was reportedly drawn into urgent conversations with royal advisors and family members. William, some insiders claim, was torn. On one hand, he understood his brother's emotional reasoning. He too had suffered the trauma of Diana's death. He too wrestled with the contradictions of their upbringing. But on the other hand, William was the future king. Stability and tradition were not just concepts to him, they were his life's mission. And watching his brother dismantle yet another pillar of that tradition was as frustrating as it was painful. But for Harry and Meghan, this was about something more primal than politics. It was about narrative, about control, about reclaiming identity in a world that had constantly tried to define it for them. In taking the Spencer name, they believed they were returning to the one part of their heritage that felt pure, uncorrupted, untainted by the cold machinery of royalty. It was not a rejection of Diana's past, it was an embrace of it. And yet, that very embrace has opened a new fault line in an already fractured royal family. When news of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's formal bid to change their family name to Spencer reached Buckingham Palace, it didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It arrived quietly, whispers in the corridors, terse phone calls between aides, and a small envelope delivered directly to the Queen's private secretary. But the silence that followed inside those palace walls was far more telling than any public proclamation. It was the kind of silence that speaks to dismay, disbelief, and the heavy weight of betrayal. Queen Elizabeth II, in her twilight years, had weathered decades of scandal, familial unrest, and public discontent with the steady grace of a monarch trained from childhood to remain unflappable. She had buried her father, watched her sister falter under the crown's expectations, survived the near collapse of the monarchy following Diana's death, and endured the years of slow rehabilitation in the public eye. But this was different. This was deeply personal. The Queen's relationship with Prince Harry had always been nuanced, marked by fondness, tempered indulgence, and, more recently, a quiet sorrow. He had once been her most spirited grandson, the one with a mischievous grin and a palpable charm, shadowed only by a palpable sadness that she could never quite reach. To her, Harry wasn't just a royal asset. He was family, blood of her blood. And perhaps, because of that closeness, his rejection of the Windsor name, a name she had spent her entire reign preserving, struck her with a pain no public affront ever had. The Queen's relationship with Prince Harry had always been nuanced, marked by fondness, tempered indulgence, and, more recently, a quiet sorrow. He had once been her most spirited grandson, the one with a mischievous grin and a palpable charm, shadowed only by a palpable sadness that she could never quite reach. To her, Harry wasn't just a royal asset. He was family, blood of her blood. And perhaps, because of that closeness, his rejection of the Windsor name, a name she had spent her entire reign preserving, struck her with a pain no public affront ever had. Sources close to the Queen say she received the news in a private meeting with her most trusted advisor. The Queen, known for her restrained reactions, reportedly remained composed, but her lips tightened, her eyes narrowed slightly, and she took several seconds before replying, "I see." She said nothing more for several minutes. For the monarch, whose every reaction could spark a national ripple, silence was not emptiness. It was a measure of gravity. In the days that followed, the palace convened a series of private discussions. Senior courtiers, including the Lord Chamberlain, the private secretary, and representatives from the royal archives, joined legal experts to determine what implications, if any, the name change would have on titles, succession, and diplomatic relations. The discussions, while administrative on the surface, carried emotional undercurrents. The crux of the issue was this. While Harry had voluntarily stepped back from official royal duties, he had never been stripped of his princely status. Nor had his children been formally removed from the line of succession. The Queen, even after the infamous Oprah interview, had chosen to leave certain doors ajar, perhaps out of hope that, in time, the wayward prince would find his way back home. The decision to change names seemed to close those doors with finality. Privately, aides close to the Queen admitted she took the decision as a rejection, not merely of the monarchy, but of her personally. The name Windsor was more than a surname. It was her legacy. It was the symbol of a century of constitutional monarchy, of global diplomacy, of post-war resilience and modern statecraft. For her grandson to abandon it, especially in favor of the Spencer name, felt like a deliberate act of erasure. But true to her nature, the Queen did not lash out. There were no scathing statements, no retaliatory leaks to the press. Instead, she turned to protocol, the shield behind which the monarchy has always protected its wounded pride. The first step was a review of all official documentation tied to the Sussex children. Archie and Lilibet had been listed with the surname Mountbatten-Windsor, a compromise made decades earlier to honor both Prince Philip and the House of Windsor. If the name change went through, legal teams questioned whether the children could still be referred to with any association to the royal house. The Queen's aides quietly requested copies of birth records, citizenship papers, and school enrollment forms. It was not about controlling the children's lives, they insisted. It was about ensuring the royal household's records remained accurate. But behind closed doors, there were murmurings about whether the name change should trigger further steps. Some senior courtiers believed this was the moment to officially strip Harry and Meghan of their remaining titles. If they no longer wanted to be Windsors, why should they retain any privileges tied to that identity? Others urged restraint, warning that such a move would deepen public perception of cruelty from the crown, particularly against a couple already skilled at framing themselves as victims. The Queen, as always, was the final arbiter. In one private meeting, she is said to have listened quietly as aides debated the issue, then raised a hand to silence the room. "We are not in the business of severing bonds," she said, "but nor will we pretend they are unchanged." Her words struck the room like a quiet hammer. The decision was not to retaliate, but to recalibrate. Officially, the palace issued a brief statement through a spokesperson. "This is a personal matter for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The royal household will make no further comment." It was carefully worded, but its cold neutrality did not go unnoticed. To those within royal circles, it was a clear indication that the palace did not support the decision, but would not engage in public confrontation. Meanwhile, behind the gilded doors of royal residences, conversations grew more emotional. Princess, and never one to mask her disdain for what she viewed as frivolity, reportedly said during a private luncheon that the monarchy is not a costume one removes and replaces at whim. Prince Edward was more reserved, but his wife, Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, is said to have wept after reading the reports. She had grown fond of Meghan during early royal engagements and had quietly hoped the tensions could one day be mended. Prince William, however, bore the brunt of the emotional fallout. As heir to the throne and older brother to Harry, he found himself in an impossible position, defending the institution he was born to protect while grieving the fracture of the only family he had left who shared the trauma of their upbringing. Insiders claim he met with the Queen at Balmoral in the days after the announcement. The meeting was scheduled for an hour. It lasted nearly 3. No details emerged from that meeting, but royal watchers noted a marked change in William's demeanor in subsequent public appearances. He appeared more solemn, more withdrawn. During a visit to a children's charity in Birmingham, when asked about family unity, he paused and simply replied, "Families are complicated." The Queen, for her part, carried on as she always had. Her public appearances remained dignified, her engagements uninterrupted. But those closest to her noted a subtle change in her routine. She spent more time in the private chapel at Windsor. She canceled 2 scheduled events citing fatigue, a rare occurrence for the monarch. And in one poignant moment, she was spotted standing alone at the window of Buckingham Palace during a rainstorm, staring into the courtyard for several minutes. Royal commentators began to speculate that this particular act by Harry had pierced something deeper than previous rifts. The interviews, the documentaries, the books. Those had been expected, but the name change felt final, irrevocable. It wasn't just a break from duty. It was a break from identity. And for a monarch whose entire reign had been defined by duty and identity intertwined, it represented a kind of grief she had never publicly acknowledged. The wider British public responded with a mix of confusion and loyalty. While many sympathized with Harry's emotional reasoning, polls showed that a majority still supported the Queen's silent stance. "She's given everything to this country," one woman told reporters outside Windsor Castle. "And now her own grandson wants to wipe the family name from his children's lives? It's heartbreaking." Yet not everyone was critical. Some young Britons saw the name change as a modern act of rebellion, a way for Harry and Meghan to reclaim their narrative and raise their children away from the suffocating expectations of royalty. Why should they be trapped by a name that comes with so much baggage? One university student asked during a BBC segment. They're doing what they think is best for their kids. But even as public debates raged, the Queen's position remained unchanged. She would not issue condemnation, nor would she offer praise. She would watch. She would wait. And, as always, she would remember. Because at its core, the monarchy is built not just on history, but on memory, on the stories it tells and the stories it chooses to ignore. And now, with her grandson severing ties to the Windsor legacy, Queen Elizabeth II found herself facing the one inevitability she had spent a lifetime preparing for but never fully accepting: the slow, painful unraveling of a family once united under one name, now scattered across continents, identities, and legacies. The silence that followed Harry and Meghan's decision to formally adopt the Spencer surname was deafening inside Kensington Palace. For Prince William, it wasn't just a headline or a familial curveball. It was a wound. Fresh, deep, and inflicted by someone he had once considered his closest ally in a world none of them had chosen to be born into. For a man poised to become the future King of England, the announcement felt less like a personal insult and more like a catastrophic destabilization of everything he had spent his life defending. William had been brought up under a unique strain of pressure, balancing the legacy of his mother, Princess Diana, with the towering expectations of the monarchy. From his earliest years, he was trained not just in matters of etiquette and diplomacy, but in emotional restraint. Where Harry had been allowed, even if reluctantly, to wear his heart on his sleeve, William had been trained to master his inner chaos. The monarchy, after all, demanded performance, and William had mastered it better than anyone. Yet the morning he read the full briefing from his aides regarding Harry's legal efforts to change his family name to Spencer, even his legendary composure faltered. One of his private secretaries later confided that William stood in his study for nearly 20 minutes without moving. His jaw clenched, eyes fixed on a portrait of his mother that hung behind his desk, a quiet, watchful presence that seemed to deepen the irony of the moment. The name Spencer carried an emotional weight that was as personal as it was political. It had belonged to their mother, Diana. And for Harry to claim it, reclaim it, and wrap his children in its banner while discarding Windsor, struck William as a betrayal, not just of their grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, but of the royal system their mother had struggled against and, paradoxically, had helped sustain. In private, William did not mince words. According to palace insiders, the Prince of Wales erupted during a closed-door meeting with senior advisors, slamming a folder on the conference table and demanding to know, does he even understand what he's done? Those present described his tone as not just angry, but deeply hurt. The move, he argued, undermined every attempt the royal family had made to integrate Diana's legacy into the modern monarchy. Harry, by elevating the Spencer name above Windsor, had effectively rejected the institution that William was preparing to lead. But William's fury wasn't only about symbolism. It was also about practical consequences. If Harry and Meghan formally adopted the Spencer name, what would that mean for their children's positions in the line of succession? Would Archie and Lilibet still be eligible to receive royal titles in the future? Would they be perceived by the public and foreign governments as members of the royal family or as private citizens with distant royal connections. And most of all, would this move embolden further attempts by Harry and Meghan to distance themselves while still profiting off royal notoriety? For William, this moment crystallized a fear he had been harboring for years, that Harry was not coming back, that the rift was no longer a temporary estrangement born of hurt feelings and ideological clashes, but a permanent divorce not only from the family, but from the very identity of being royal. And for a man raised to see family unity as foundational to national stability, that realization was devastating. Behind the scenes, William began taking decisive action. He instructed his communications team to begin drafting internal protocols for how to respond to inquiries about the Spencer name change. He personally called senior aides at Clarence House in Sandringham, requesting their input on how to handle the PR blowback without fanning the flames. But perhaps most tellingly, he placed a private call to his father, King Charles III. The conversation between father and son, described by one palace source as tense but urgent, centered on what the monarchy's long-term strategy should be regarding Harry. The king, ever the pragmatist, had adopted a wait-and-see approach. Charles still harbored hopes of a reconciliation, though they had dimmed with each new controversy. William, however, pushed for a clearer stance. "We can't have one foot in and one foot out anymore," he reportedly told his father. "He's made his choice. It's time we make ours." While no immediate decisions were made during the call, the dialogue marked a significant shift in the family's internal dynamics. William was no longer content to let things drift in limbo. He was preparing to draw lines in the sand. And for someone like William, who had always walked the fine line between family loyalty and royal responsibility, that was no small evolution. Friends of the Prince of Wales say that, in the days following the name change announcement, he withdrew into himself. He canceled 2 private engagements and spent extended time with his wife, Catherine, and their 3 children. Photographs taken during a family outing to Norfolk showed William uncharacteristically solemn, even as he held Princess Charlotte's hand. Observers noted the absence of his usual warmth, the slight stoop in his shoulders, the look of a man carrying a heavier burden than usual. The emotional toll wasn't limited to William alone. Catherine, who had played the role of peacekeeper for years, was said to be deeply affected as well. She had tried, particularly during the early years of Meghan's entrance into the family, to bridge the gap between the brothers. But after the Oprah interview and subsequent public statements, even she had grown weary of the Sussexes' narrative. To see Harry now rejecting the family name altogether felt, to her, like the final blow. In their private residence at Adelaide Cottage, William and Catherine reportedly held long conversations about what this meant for the future. Would their own children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, be forced to answer questions about their estranged cousins? Would the public's perception of the monarchy be forever split between the dutiful Cambridges and the rebellious Sussexes? The questions were endless. The answers, elusive. Meanwhile, the media firestorm intensified. British tabloids, ever eager to sensationalize royal drama, ran headlines such as "Windsor no more," "Prince Harry goes full Spencer," and "The brothers' final break." Pundits debated the move across networks and podcasts, with some framing Harry's decision as courageous, a way to honor his mother and protect his children, and others painting it as a narcissistic attempt to rebrand for personal gain. For William, the media circus only added salt to the wound. He had spent years trying to shield his family from the worst excesses of tabloid intrusion, remembering all too well how it had plagued his mother's life. Now, once again, he was watching his family be torn apart in public view, unable to stop the hemorrhaging. Perhaps the most painful moment came a week after the name change filing, during a formal reception at St. James's Palace. William was meeting with military veterans and representatives from Commonwealth nations when a Nigerian delegate, unaware of the family's internal tensions, innocently asked, "How are your brother and his children doing?" William paused for a split second too long. Those closest to him would have noticed the flicker of pain that crossed his face. But he recovered quickly, offering a diplomatic response. "They are well, I believe. I hope they are happy." It was a standard answer. Polite, non-committal. But the moment lingered. Because beneath the polished exterior was a man who no longer knew how to answer that question honestly. He did not know if his brother was well. He did not know if his niece and nephew were happy. He only knew that they had chosen a different path, one that now seemed entirely foreign. In the privacy of their home later that evening, William is said to have stood for a long time on the balcony overlooking the palace gardens. Catherine joined him, resting a hand on his arm. After a moment, he said quietly, "He's gone, hasn't he?" Catherine didn't respond. She didn't need to. In the weeks that followed, William began making quiet preparations, not for retaliation, but for insulation. He initiated conversations with his team about how to define the roles of his children in the future monarchy. He requested updates to the family's long-term communication strategy. Most significantly, he instructed aides to begin reviewing protocols for the eventual day when he would ascend to the throne. It was a subtle shift, but a profound one. William was no longer waiting for Harry to come home. He was preparing to lead without him. When Meghan Markle first stepped into the royal spotlight, the British public was sharply divided. Some viewed her as a modern breath of fresh air, a biracial American actress who brought glamour and empathy to the centuries-old institution. Others saw her as a disruptor, unwilling to conform to royal expectations and too eager to shake up traditions. But even her harshest critics could not have predicted the magnitude of the transformation she would lead within the House of Windsor. Now, with the announcement that she and Prince Harry would be formally adopting the Spencer name for themselves and their children, critics and supporters alike were asking the same question. Was this a reclaiming of identity or a cold, calculated war against the royal family? To understand Meghan's motivations, one must first understand her strategic mindset. Long before her royal engagement, Meghan had carefully crafted her public image. From lifestyle blogging on the TIG to her humanitarian work with the UN, Meghan had built a brand centered around empowerment, independence, and advocacy. Her marriage to Prince Harry gave her a global platform, but it also imposed rigid limitations. The crown, by its very nature, demands conformity. Meghan, by her very nature, rejects it. Those close to Meghan describe her as intensely intelligent, deliberate in her choices, and unflinchingly protective of her narrative. For a woman who had spent her adult life curating a message of self-ownership and voice, the confines of royal life were suffocating. The press regulations, the clothing protocols, the prohibition against political commentary, all of it ran counter to the very identity she had spent years building. Her exit from royal life was not a spontaneous retreat. It was a strategic withdrawal. According to sources within Meghan's inner circle, the decision to pursue the Spencer name wasn't made on impulse. It had been under quiet consideration for over a year, discussed in private conversations between her, Harry, and a select group of legal advisors and branding consultants. The name Sussex, while legally tied to their titles, was beginning to feel like a relic of a past life, one defined by trauma, betrayal, and endless public scrutiny. The name Spencer, by contrast, offered emotional significance, legacy, and a powerful narrative pivot. It was, in many ways, the ultimate PR play. By aligning themselves with the Spencer legacy, Diana's legacy, Meghan and Harry weren't just stepping away from the monarchy, they were recasting themselves as its victims, the rightful heirs to a reformist spirit that had been suppressed by royal tradition. To their supporters, this move felt like poetic justice. To their critics, it was naked opportunism. In Montecito, the rebranding began quietly. New stationery was printed, reflecting the Spencer Family Foundation at the header. Contracts for upcoming business ventures, including Meghan's new podcast series and Harry's documentary collaborations, were drawn up under their personal names, Harry Spencer and Meghan Spencer. Even Archie and Lilibet's school records were updated, signaling that this was not a trial balloon, but a permanent shift in identity. But behind the scenes, this move was not without complications. Legally, members of the royal family are subject to a unique set of conventions that blur the line between personal rights and institutional expectations. Although Harry and Meghan had stepped down from royal duties, they retained their HRH titles, even if they no longer used them, and remained Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Adopting a new surname, especially one so politically loaded, raised complex legal questions. Would the UK government recognize the name change for royal descendants in the line of succession? Could this move be interpreted as a formal renunciation of royal lineage? Could it, in the worst-case scenario, be construed as a breach of existing agreements between the Sussexes and Buckingham Palace? According to palace insiders, Queen Camilla was incensed. In a private conversation overheard by a staff member, Camilla reportedly said, "This is no longer about family. This is about dismantling the very fabric of the crown." Her sentiment echoed the frustration felt by many inside the palace, where Meghan's decision was seen not as an act of personal healing, but as a declaration of ideological war. King Charles, on the other hand, adopted a more tempered stance. Those close to him say he was deeply disappointed but not surprised. He had long sensed that Meghan saw the monarchy as a gilded cage, not a crown jewel. And while he had once hoped that time would soften her views, the Spencer name change signaled that her mind was firmly made up. Still, the king refrained from making public statements, wary of further inflaming the media and deepening public divisions. Privately, he commissioned legal advisors to assess the ramifications of the name change on the line of succession. While no immediate threats to Archie and Lilibet's position were identified, the legal memos circulated within the palace noted that such a rebranding could eventually compel the crown to re-evaluate title designations, especially if the children were to engage in future commercial ventures under the Spencer brand. And that, precisely, was the plan. Multiple sources familiar with Meghan's business strategy confirmed that the Spencer name change was tied to a broader content empire already in motion. A new docuseries, tentatively titled The Diana Lineage, was in pre-production with a major streaming platform. Meghan's team had approached several female authors to collaborate on a new memoir/manifesto, with working titles such as Reclaimed and Uncrowned. Meghan's upcoming lifestyle brand, long rumored to rival Martha Stewart and Goop, would carry the Spencer signature as its flagship label. The message was clear: this wasn't a name change. It was a total brand overhaul. Critics swiftly responded. Piers Morgan, never one to miss an opportunity for a scathing monologue, accused Meghan of weaponizing Diana's name for profit. Several members of the British press speculated whether Meghan would go as far as to petition for titles within the Spencer lineage, reviving dormant aristocratic claims to further insulate her family from Windsor influence. While legal experts dismissed this as implausible, the mere possibility sent shockwaves through court watchers. But perhaps the most controversial fallout came from within the Spencer family itself. Earl Charles Spencer, Diana's brother and the custodian of Althorpe Estate, reportedly had not been consulted about the move. Friends of the Earl said he felt blindsided and deeply uncomfortable with the implication that the Spencer heritage was now being wielded as a corporate tool. In a rare public comment during a BBC Radio 4 interview, Charles Spencer chose his words carefully. Family names carry significance, yes, but what they truly mean is defined by the people who bear them. I trust my sister's legacy will be honored by all who invoke it. It was a statement that, while diplomatic, hinted at unease. Despite the criticism, Meghan remained steadfast. At a private women's leadership summit in San Francisco, where she made an unannounced appearance, Meghan delivered a powerful off-the-record address. According to those present, she spoke openly about the trauma of royal life, the loss of autonomy, and the necessity of reclaiming her children's futures. No child of mine, she reportedly said, will ever be forced to silence their voice to preserve a system that tried to break ours. That quote circulated swiftly within inner circles and eventually leaked to media outlets, further fueling the narrative that Meghan viewed this as more than a name. It was a revolution. Supporters, particularly in American media, framed her as a heroine. Magazine editorials praised her for restoring agency to a stifled legacy and called the move a feminist masterstroke. On social media, hashtags like #SpencerRising and #MeghanReclaims trended for days. But in Britain, the tone was different. Polls conducted in the aftermath showed a sharp decline in public approval for the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. Even former allies in the press expressed concerns that the couple's increasingly combative stance toward the monarchy was alienating moderates and sowing deeper divisions within the Commonwealth. Amid all this, Meghan appeared to be undeterred. Her focus was laser-sharp, her messaging tightly controlled. The narrative she was constructing was not one of rebellion, but of redemption. She was not dismantling the monarchy, in her eyes. She was liberating herself from a legacy that had caused immeasurable pain. And in doing so, she believed she was paving a better path for her children. Still, the question lingered. Where did this leave Harry? While Meghan spearheaded the strategic and public-facing elements of the name change, it was Harry who bore the emotional consequences within his birth family. He was, after all, the son of the king, the brother of the heir, and the only royal in modern memory to voluntarily renounce his family name while still being in line to the throne. It was unprecedented. It was defiant. It was, for many, unforgivable. Yet Meghan saw it differently. To her, Harry wasn't betraying his family. He was honoring the one member who had always been his compass, his mother. The Spencer name, to Meghan, was not a rejection of royalty, it was a reclamation of dignity. Still, intentions do not nullify consequences. and the consequences were growing by the day. In the sprawling halls of Buckingham Palace, silence had taken on a new, oppressive quality. For decades, the royal family had been adept at mastering the art of the quiet response, of ignoring scandal until it withered in the heat of public boredom. But Meghan and Harry's declaration to shed the Sussex title and assume the Spencer name ignited something far more dangerous than a fleeting tabloid headline. It ignited a legitimacy crisis. And this time, silence would no longer be sufficient. When news broke that Meghan and Harry had legally filed to change their surname and intended to rebrand their public and private ventures under the Spencer lineage, there was an initial moment of disbelief within royal circles. Advisors scrambled to verify the paperwork. Legal teams examined its implications for peerage, inheritance, and even succession. For all the criticism Harry and Meghan had received over the years, few in the palace believed they would go so far as to symbolically sever themselves from the monarchy in this public and provocative way. But they had. And the monarchy was now facing its greatest public relations crisis since the death of Princess Diana in 1997. The king's first instinct was to maintain the traditional dignified silence. Charles had learned from his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, that emotion was a luxury monarchs could not afford. Even in the face of personal devastation, divorce, death, family disgrace, the crown's response must be calculated and consistent. But this wasn't just a family issue. It was a constitutional challenge wrapped in the cloak of a personal betrayal. On the morning after the announcement, King Charles held a private emergency meeting at Clarence House with his most senior advisors. The list included the Lord Chamberlain, the private secretary, and representatives from the Cabinet Office. The Archbishop of Canterbury was consulted quietly. Though technically a religious figure, the Archbishop had long been seen as an unofficial moral compass for the royal family, and his input was considered critical in moments of national sensitivity. The discussions were reportedly tense. One aide was heard describing the situation as existential. Not only had Harry and Meghan publicly distanced themselves from the monarchy, they were doing so under the banner of a name that directly tied them to Diana, arguably the most beloved and controversial figure in modern royal history. The implications were volcanic. By assuming the Spencer name, Meghan and Harry were implicitly casting the Windsors as villains in Diana's tragic story and themselves as the rightful stewards of her legacy. One advisor suggested that the palace should challenge the name change legally, but it was quickly dismissed. The Spencers were not a royal line, but an aristocratic one, and as British citizens, Harry and Meghan were entitled to adopt that surname if they wished. The issue wasn't legality. It was perception, and the perception was that the royal family had lost control of its own narrative. Queen Camilla was reportedly the most vocal during the meeting. According to multiple palace sources, she described Meghan's actions as a carefully orchestrated attack on the monarchy and urged the king to issue a formal response. "If we let this pass without comment," she reportedly said, "we concede the battlefield." But the king hesitated. His instinct, always, was to protect his sons, even when their actions cut him deeply. In private, Charles still referred to Harry as "my boy," and according to those close to him, he carried immense guilt over his failure to protect both his sons from the psychological consequences of Diana's death and the relentless demands of royalty. But guilt was now a luxury the institution could no longer afford. 2 days later, the palace released a carefully worded statement. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex, while no longer working members of the royal family, remain beloved members of His Majesty's family. The Crown has no comment regarding their personal naming choices. The line of succession remains unchanged. The statement was short. It said nothing, but hinted at everything. In its quiet coldness, many read a veiled message: "You are no longer part of us." Inside the family, the damage was even more severe. Prince William was reportedly incandescent. For months, his relationship with Harry had been teetering on collapse, sustained only by a few mutual confidants and the shared pain of losing their mother. But the name change felt like a final blow, an intentional move designed to drive a wedge through the heart of what remained. William's anger was not merely personal, it was institutional. As the future king, he understood that the monarchy could not function without public faith in its continuity and cohesion. Harry's rebranding as a Spencer not only cast doubt on that cohesion, it also subtly undermined William's own authority. The public loved Diana. And now Harry, by invoking her surname and her image, had assumed the emotional mantle of her legacy, leaving William appearing cold and distant by comparison. At Kensington Palace, William convened his own group of advisors. Discussions were reportedly more strategic than emotional. His team began re-evaluating public engagement plans, including a scheduled tour of Australia that was now under threat of media sabotage. The concern wasn't just what Meghan and Harry had done, but what they might do next. Would they release another documentary? A memoir? A series of interviews painting the royal family as an oppressive institution from which they had escaped? One scenario floated among the team was that Meghan might attempt to secure a hereditary title through the Spencer peerage. Though legally implausible, it was a PR nightmare waiting to happen. The idea that Meghan could claim Lady Spencer or Countess of Althorpe status, even through branding rather than legality, would confuse the public and threaten the clarity of the royal hierarchy. To counter this, William's team began subtly reasserting his own connection to Diana. Plans were accelerated to unveil a new statue of the princess in a public ceremony marking what would have been her 65th birthday. A new documentary project, quietly commissioned by William, was greenlit, with a clear directive to portray Diana not just as a rebel, but as a mother who cherished duty and believed in the future of the crown. But the public narrative was already slipping. Media outlets, particularly in America, framed Harry and Meghan's move as a bold assertion of identity and independence. Headlines in the U.S. gushed over the Spencer reawakening and Diana's legacy reclaimed. Talk shows lauded Meghan's courage. Influential American figures, from journalists to celebrities, praised the couple's decision as liberating. In contrast, the British press was far more critical. The Daily Mail accused the couple of trading royal dignity for commercial gain. The Telegraph editorialized that the move marked the beginning of the end of the modern monarchy. Even normally moderate outlets like The Times suggested that the monarchy needed to reclaim its authority before the institution becomes a soap opera. The public was deeply divided. Polls showed a generational rift. Britons over the age of 50 overwhelmingly disapproved of the name change, while those under 35 supported it or expressed indifference. In Commonwealth nations like Canada and Australia, Republic movements seized on the drama to renew calls for cutting ties with the Crown. The Crown's international standing was no longer secure. What had begun as a name change now posed a threat to the institution's global reputation. Within the palace, Prince Edward and Princess Anne attempted to act as intermediaries. Both had long histories of managing internal family tensions, and both were respected for their loyalty and discretion. Princess Anne, in particular, was said to be furious, not at Harry and Meghan, but at what she called our failure to protect the institution from internal collapse. During a private dinner at Balmoral, Anne reportedly told the king, "This is not about Harry. It's about how we've let the past haunt the present." Her comment referred not only to Diana, but to the monarchy's long history of family dysfunction, an unresolved legacy that continued to rear its head in destructive ways. Yet no matter how much the family attempted to control the narrative, it was slipping away. Meghan and Harry were no longer relying on the press. They were shaping their own story, through their own platforms, with a global audience that often sympathized more with them than with the crown. The monarchy, for all its centuries of survival, was beginning to look like a relic of a fading era. An institution struggling to adapt to a world where transparency, emotion, and personal truth had more currency than ceremony. And the name Spencer, once a footnote to royalty, was now a banner flying boldly in opposition. When Meghan Markle and Prince Harry formally announced their decision to drop the Windsor surname and adopt the Spencer name, it wasn't just a legal or symbolic move. It was a declaration of independence, a strategic rebranding that sent tremors across the globe. No longer content to operate within the shadow of a centuries-old monarchy, they had chosen instead to stake their future on a narrative deeply rooted in personal legacy and emotional resonance. And in doing so, they triggered a seismic shift in how modern audiences viewed royal identity, historical trauma, and the power of personal storytelling. The name Spencer carried with it a gravity that transcended titles and institutional tradition. While the Windsors represented the rigidity of monarchy, the Spencers symbolized both tragedy and rebellion. Diana, Princess of Wales, had taken the Spencer name and made it global, her life and untimely death immortalizing it in a way that resonated deeply with people who felt disenfranchised by traditional power structures. She had been dubbed the People's Princess, and now her youngest son and his wife were reactivating that emotional currency for a new generation. From the outset, Meghan and Harry's rebranding campaign was deliberate and layered with meaning. It began quietly, with subtle changes to official documentation and online presence. The couple's Archwell Foundation, once a nebulous entity blending personal mission with philanthropy, began issuing press releases and blog posts referencing their new last name. Legal teams filed paperwork in California and the UK. Public relations advisors, some with backgrounds in Silicon Valley and Hollywood image consultancy, worked behind the scenes to frame the narrative in emotionally charged but legally unassailable terms. But the real turning point came when Meghan gave an exclusive interview to a prominent American journalist. Filmed in Montecito under controlled conditions, the interview was a masterclass in brand management. Meghan, dressed simply and seated in front of a backdrop of trees and sunlight, spoke candidly about her desire to raise her children outside the expectations of the royal family. She emphasized the importance of names and legacy, and how the Spencer name connected their family to a story of resilience, compassion, and modern values. Her words echoed across social media and traditional news platforms alike. Within hours, the interview had been dissected, praised, condemned, and reinterpreted by millions. Hashtags like #SpencerLegacy and #DianaReborn trended on X and Instagram. Meghan's narrative wasn't just about escaping royal duties. It was about reclaiming a lineage that had, in her view, been co-opted and stifled by an institution that never fully embraced her. Harry, for his part, followed with his own statement. Unlike Meghan, he avoided interviews and instead released a reflective essay, published through a prominent online publication. In the essay, Harry wrote about his mother's pain and how her death had shaped his understanding of public life. He spoke of watching the monarchy from the inside and realizing that love, truth, and legacy should not be traded for ceremony and silence. "My mother was not a symbol," he wrote. "She was a woman, a mother, and a fighter for people who felt unseen. To carry her name is not to break away from the past, it's to carry the truth forward." These dual statements were not issued in haste. They were part of a coordinated campaign aimed at redefining not only their personal identities but their public roles. And the public responded in kind. In the United States, the couple's star power saw a dramatic resurgence. Media outlets that had once criticized their Netflix documentaries and Oprah interviews now framed the rebrand as courageous. Talk shows praised them for rejecting the elitism of the monarchy. Influencers and celebrities aligned themselves with the Spencer name, citing it as a symbol of breaking generational trauma and embracing authenticity. The cultural climate, already primed for stories of liberation and individual empowerment, absorbed the narrative like a sponge. The commercial ramifications were immediate and vast. Endorsement offers poured in from luxury and socially conscious brands eager to associate with the new Spencer identity. Meghan and Harry launched a lifestyle line under the House of Spencer brand, focusing on sustainable fashion, wellness, and parenting. The name, once symbolic of aristocracy, was now being reinvented as a modern, ethical label. Public interest in Spencer-related properties, including Althorpe House, Diana's childhood home, skyrocketed. Tourism to the site surged as fans and sympathizers traveled to pay tribute not only to Diana, but to the vision her son and daughter-in-law were now promoting. Netflix reportedly fast-tracked a new docuseries titled Spencer, The Legacy, chronicling the family's history and Diana's enduring influence. Harry and Meghan were both executive producers. The series promised to be less combative than Harry and Meghan, but no less revealing. Early promotional clips suggested it would explore the tension between public duty and private pain, with rare footage and interviews with Diana's siblings and confidants. The gamble paid off, at least in the American market. Within weeks, Archwell's donations surged, their social media metrics broke new ground, and invitations to major public events, from the Met Gala to the United Nations, flooded in. Meghan was approached by publishing houses with lucrative offers for a memoir, one focused not on palace life, but on motherhood, resilience, and identity as seen through the lens of a biracial woman navigating legacy and global scrutiny. Yet, in Britain, the story was far more complicated. The reaction from the British press was polarized. Tabloids like The Sun and the Daily Express denounced the move as manipulative, accusing Meghan and Harry of profiting off the Spencer name while simultaneously disrespecting the Queen's legacy and the monarchy's core traditions. Editorials questioned the ethics of building a commercial empire off a name so emotionally loaded, and accused the couple of twisting Diana's memory into a convenient brand tool. Pundits debated whether the rebrand was an act of self-empowerment or a cynical business maneuver. Even within the Spencer family, tension brewed. Charles Spencer, Diana's brother and custodian of Althorpe, issued a brief statement emphasizing that the Spencer name represented more than just Diana's legacy, it was a lineage with responsibilities and standards. While he stopped short of condemning Harry and Meghan, his tone suggested caution and a quiet discomfort with how the name was being leveraged in the public sphere. Private sources indicated that the Earl was deeply conflicted. On one hand, he remained protective of Diana's memory and understood his nephew's grievances. On the other, he had long maintained a distance from the media circus surrounding Meghan and Harry. The idea of the Spencer name becoming a global brand attached to luxury products and docuseries was not one he welcomed. Still, the momentum behind the Spencer rebranding seemed unstoppable. The couple had built a framework around it that was more than just sentimental, it was strategic. At a time when trust in traditional institutions was eroding, and audiences were increasingly drawn to narratives of resilience and reinvention, Meghan and Harry offered a compelling story. They weren't just escaping something. They were claiming something, something emotionally powerful, media-savvy, and culturally resonant. In the process, they forced a re-examination of what royal legacy really meant in the 21st century. By anchoring themselves in the Spencer name, they effectively reshaped the hierarchy of legacy. No longer did royal bloodlines determine influence. No longer did proximity to the crown guarantee relevance. Instead, emotion, story, and public connection dictated power, and in that landscape, the Spencers, not the Windsors, were winning. The question now was how far the couple would take this new identity and whether the rest of the royal family could respond in a way that preserved both dignity and influence in a world rapidly changing beneath their feet. It began with whispers, as all royal secrets tend to do. For months, perhaps even years, there had been talk within the corridors of Buckingham Palace about a personal archive that Queen Elizabeth II had assembled before her.